Sunday shortly thereafter, I got up and I put on my uniform and I got in my patrol car and I went to work a 4-hour block of traffic enforcement. And after I finished that 4-hour block, I pulled my car into the parking lot of an abandoned gas station. I backed it into a parking space in front of the building, and I pulled out my sidearm, and I stopped right here. I yelled at God, and I said, I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know where you're at, but if you have a plan or a purpose for my life, you can have it. Otherwise, I'm out. I'm tired of hurting. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of struggling. I'm done.
What's going on, guys? How are you? Seriously, I'd like to know. How are you? How's your life, your health, your relationships, kids, your job? What about your faith? And look, I know the normal answers, the surface responses. Good, great, fine, living the dream, which, at least in my profession, means something completely different. But we don't do normal or surface responses here. So how are you? Could you use some hope, healing, peace, even a little bit of adventure? Well, that's why we're here. In fact, that's the only reason we're here. And our goal is to provide that hope, healing, peace, and maybe even that little bit of adventure using a spirit-driven focus that produces life-altering results. I'm your host, Chad Campese, and this is a zero filter, zero filler, zero judgment show. So just a heads up, there is no room for little ears here. Our first season features first responders, of which I am one, and we deal with stories, real-life situations, and real people. And that is not always proper or pretty in the realms that some of my guests and I swim in. If you haven't yet, go back and listen to the trailer. Check out what we're doing and why we're here. Our focus, well, that's essentially finding a life-altering peace by being spirit-driven. And please, you could literally be saving lives and families by inviting others to hope, healing, and peace simply by liking, subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing the podcast on social media. But I've talked enough. Today, well, we have Mr. Adam Davis with us. He's a former law enforcement officer, a best-selling author and speaker, and he founded the Live Unconquered Foundation to help support first responders all around the world. Today, we talk about how to find peace and leadership, even a little bit of redemption, in the midst of some pretty severe trauma, addiction, guilt, and shame. And we are going to jump right into it. Adam, how are you this morning?
Doing well, Chad. Thank you for the opportunity to sit down and talk to you for a little bit.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. I'm curious, obviously, with my interviews. What I like to do is kind of start with, we have a very Facebook, Instagram culture. We talk about our successes and how well we're doing and all the good stuff and cool stuff we're jumping into. But I'm curious kind of what were those moments in your life? We kind of can go back from there. But, the biggest moment or the biggest kind of failures and faults that you have dealt with over the years. That kind of brought you to either the call of Christ or kind of led you to a desperate point in your life where you needed to reach out for some help and kind of had the impact of God or the impact of Christ come in and kind of help you and work forward from there?
Yeah, that is not a brief answer.
Absolutely not. I'm sure
I can give you a brief answer, but
we don't do brief here.
Journey, no. Well, I'll back up. My mom and dad divorced when I was about 5 years old, and mom remarried a Pentecostal preacher. So I grew up going to church 13 days a week, and in the deep South, what they call the Bible Belt. And so I grew up hearing the sermons in a little, country church where if you do this, you're going to go to hell. If you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. Or I remember when I was old enough to join as a member, signing the membership card of the church, and can't go to movies, you can't dance, which didn't really matter because I can't dance, and and you can't listen to rock and roll music. And I'm thinking, I don't know of anybody that would want to be a part of this. Like, this sucks. Like, this
That's
is
a lot
not
of
fun.
can'ts. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of can'ts. And so that's kind of how I grew up around it. But what's funny is before my mom remarried, and after that, her and dad divorced, she left me with a neighbor. And the neighbor was an older male and no family. He wasn't a family member, nothing like that. And it started off pretty normal, but it quickly turned dark, and he put a VHS tape into a VCR on top of one of those big console TVs that are super heavy, and it was pornography. And it wasn't long after watching that stuff, in which I could still remember like certain scenes or certain things that he would pause the video on and rewind it or fast forward it or whatever.
And how old were you at this point?
About 5. Yeah.
5. And your mom, was this like a babysitting thing, or she literally
Yeah,
left you like to be raised?
No. I was left with him to babysit me.
Babysit, okay.
And then he started doing things to me like similar to what he was, showing me on the TV. And so rape and sodomy and a lot of really bad stuff. And so I grew up, with a lot of fear, guilt, a lot of shame, but fear really. There was a time in my life until 2015, I was a law enforcement officer, and there were things that I was still afraid of, but I would attack them. I'd dive right in. I had this little trigger in my head that would, like this little phrase, and I'm not going to share it with you. But I would just go and do work. I enjoyed police work. I enjoyed that. But anyway, so that happened when I was 5-ish, around 5. And then I wrote about it in my book, Unconquered. And, I got up on stages all over the country, from New York to LA and everywhere in between, Seattle to South Alabama. But when I went to put it in a book, it was bringing up some really dark stuff, and it took a lot out of me. I could remember the color of the room, what the carpet looked like, what the TV looked like. I could remember certain sounds and smells and phrases and feelings. But neither here nor there, that would rock on. And then growing up in a pastor's home, I'd get to see my dad because of their court orders. I'd get to see my dad every other weekend. And this year, he celebrates being in business for 44 years. So he's been a small business owner for 44 years. Auto collision repair, tow truck service, all that good stuff.
So he is no longer a pastor?
No, that's my biological dad. The man she remarried was a pastor. The man she remarried was a pastor, or is a pastor. Anyhow, so growing up being around in church all the time, and leadership and pastors and all that jazz, I felt like, that maybe this is where God's calling me. And the more I was around it, the more I felt, hey, God's called me to be a pastor. And so I looked up to church leaders. I looked up to, the church leadership figures or whatever. I felt like that was where God was calling me to be one day, in which I was probably the youngest person in the church. And I was 15 when my mom left me with another babysitter, but this time she was a woman who was a leader in the church. She was married with children and in her 30s. So she would go from, shaking the tambourine in church or singing to making me strawberry daiquiris with Bacardi. And then soon that would turn into a sexual relationship that would last until about the time I turned 16, when my dad gave me a car. It was a 1993 Geo Metro, mint green hatchback, 5-speed, got like 63 miles to the gallon. And so I started going to a different church. And, and, and so that the problem with all of that was I didn't understand how deceived I was. Phrases like God put you in my life to be a part of my healing. If you want to really fulfill your purpose for God, you have to be obedient, and being a part of this process is obedience. And just
Those were
really
things the woman
twisted.
had said to you, or
Yeah, twisted deception, manipulation, and so I turned 16. Dad gives me the chick mobile, the little mint green hatchback Geo Metro, and I start going to a different church. And I pull up on a Wednesday night for their youth service and locked my keys in my car. Called Dad and I told him, "Hey, I'm in trouble. I need you to come unlock my car." What I was really doing was crying out for help because I had nobody really to talk to about this junk. And so he pulled up in the wrecker, and I got in, I locked the door, and I said, "I'm in trouble." And he was like, I'm here to unlock the car. It's not a big deal. I mean, yeah, stupid mistake, but it's not a big deal. And I said, "No, it's more than that." And I told him about the neighbor when I was a little boy. And then I told him about the woman in the church. And Dad's first words were rage and violence. And then I remember him saying a phrase that stuck with me. And it was, "I've got to protect you. I got to protect you." And believe it or not.
Is there something that led you to that day doing that? Was it just a culmination of like all of a sudden you needed
I wanted to be a normal freaking teenager, man. I really wanted just to be a normal teenager and have friends. But from the time I was a little boy to that point, I had been super freaking awkward because if I wasn't at school, public school, I was doing something with church, and not that I was like leading anything, but I was there. And I just wanted to be a normal kid, dude. Like I wanted to go have friends and do things that high school kids do, whatever that is. And so I had another girl that wanted to be a girlfriend, and she didn't like it because she wanted to marry me when I turned 18. She was going to divorce her husband and leave her family and marry an 18-year-old kid. And she was really upset that I had girlfriends, and I was like, I'm really like, I'm done with this bull crap. Like I'm over this. And so I just kind of disconnected from their church as much as I could because, my mother and her husband were leaders there, and that's where I was expected to go. I disconnected from that whole situation as much as I could. But Dad pulled me out of that whole mess and put me at his house for a while. And so, yeah, I was really, really screwed up. Really screwed up. And here's how I screwed up. My perspective of trust, of God, of faith, of relationships, of love, of intimacy, sex, friendship. I mean, you name it. I was completely jacked up. When I was a little boy, after that junk happened with a male neighbor, I got to the point, a few years in that where I couldn't control bowel movements, or I developed a speech impediment. And so my mother would take me to these psychiatrists and try to figure out why I've got these issues. And people, apparently it was either they knew about it and wanted to sweep it under the rug, or they didn't pick up on it. I don't know. But when you can't control bowel movements as a, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, it makes making friends a little awkward. When you have a speech impediment, it makes things a little awkward, And so I was awkward, just awkward. And we rock on until that junk ended when I was 16. And I went through dating relationships with other girls. And premarital sex and dating. And I was just dating for sex. That's all I was doing. I was just going out. And my Friday and Saturday night, I would party and whatever I could do. And Sunday, I'd be in church, and that was the routine. And but when you're carrying kind of, and I'm not making excuses, but I've always tried to find the root cause of my own behavior, because if I can find the root cause of a behavior, then I can change the behavior. If I just change the behavior because I don't like the result, instead of understanding why I'm making decisions and why I'm doing things, then I don't think there's a lot of potential for success. And so all that junk ended when I was about 16. I got married to the beautiful woman I'm married to today. We've been married this past September is 24 years.
Wow, congratulations.
We got married. Thank you. We got married at 18, and I do not regret marrying her one bit. What I regret is not giving her a whole, well, and healthy man. Because let's face it, even if I had never been through any of those circumstances at 5 or 15, I still had no freaking clue what I was doing at 18, being an adult and husband and out on my own. I was figuring everything out the hard way.
Did she know about the past history?
She knew about it. Yeah, she knew about it. Yeah, I told her about it, but she didn't understand. Neither one of us understood how it affected me,
Right.
How guilt affects a man, how shame affects a man, how fear, how all those things impact our decisions in every facet of our life. So we got married, and the first year, I think I packed my bags every week trying to run away anytime some kind of conflict came up.
Oh, geez.
Because I had been so good at masking pain or running from it. I mean, look, from the time I was a little boy, I learned how to put on a mask and pretend to be strong, even when I wasn't. I remember, that's the reality of it. That's raw. I mean, that's uncomfortable. And so what happened was, everybody thought we were getting married at 18 because I got her pregnant. And if that would have been the case, it was the longest pregnancy, because our first child didn't come along until 2004. We got married in 2000. And he was due in March of 04. In January, February, somewhere in that time frame of 04, I'm standing outside my house where we were at the time. And I'm doing some reflection. Like, I have no idea how to be a dad. And I am scared to death. I don't know what to do. Like, I don't want to be, I don't want to mess up. I don't want to screw this up. And I realized that there was something off inside of me. For the first, 4 years of our marriage, I had worked in a bank, in a laundromat, in a construction site, construction company, and then finally sold cars, sold insurance, because I was looking for fulfillment and purpose in vocation, and it wasn't there. And then I finally started in pest control after she found out she was pregnant with our first child. And so I was doing pest control for a company and stayed in that for a while. Found some stability and some consistency there. Wasn't making like crazy money, but it was enough to get by. And but that January, February night outside the house, I realized that something was off inside of me. And it was like pure hate. Because as I began to think about what it would mean to be a father, to be a dad, to be present, to show up, I started thinking about my own childhood. I started thinking about how I didn't really want my dad to hug me. Not that my dad had ever done anything to me, but just because of what happened to me as a little boy, I didn't want a dude touching me, man. I don't want you touching me. Like, stay away from me. And I thought about that, and I thought about how awkward I was and how hard it was to make friendships and build friendships and just have normal freaking relationships, man. Just normal stuff. Just somebody that would care about you and check on you, that's not trying to abuse you in some way. And spiritual abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, physical, sexual, you name it. I just wanted normal. And so the more I thought about that and was reflecting on my own childhood and like, how can I do things different? I started really, really feeling a strong, deep-seated hatred for the people who hurt me and the people who swept it under the rug when they found out about it. And the people who condoned it, the people who refused to validate what I felt, because that was a time when we didn't talk about things like that. We didn't bring that up. You just keep your mouth shut and you deal with it. Well, with all due respect to professionals and experts everywhere, there's just some things that you got to have some help with. There's just things you got to have help with. And I felt that night, man, I really wanted these people to be gone. Like, I hated them, man. I hated them when I started thinking about the root, like the foundation that they tarnished and corrupted in me because of how young it was in my formidable years. I was pissed off and full of rage. And so I had gained enough from going to church a lot to know that I needed to forgive. Not in a sense of, hey, we're good, don't worry about it, no problem, whatever, but in a sense of, I've got to have freedom. But you can hear sermons all day, but not understand how to apply something, not understand how to execute something. And so I've spent most of my life trying to figure out how to process forgiveness. But that particular night, I wanted to do something. And so here's how it looked. I'm very complex process and how I began. And so I bowed my head, standing outside my house, leaning up against my truck, and I said, God, I forgive them. Amen. I still want to kill them. Let's do it again. I don't feel any better. And I did it again, and I did it again, and I did it again. Because I think oftentimes we think that forgiveness is supposed to make us feel better immediately. And sometimes it does. Sometimes it's instant relief. And it depends on the offense, really. I mean, if you and I are passing each other in an elevator and you bump into me and spill my coffee, yeah, it's an inconvenience, but it's not traumatic. I mean, let's be real. There's really no need for forgiveness there. I'm sorry. Hey, man, I apologize about that. Forgiveness is based on some form of relationship. Forgiveness is needed in some form of relationship, whether there's whether it's an intimate relationship or family relationship. It's that night I understood that I needed to begin the process, and as little as I knew, and I feel like I know less now, but I knew that it was going to be a progressive journey. It's like healing. Healing sometimes happens instantly. Sometimes there are crazy cool miracles that happen. Sometimes it's through the hands of a physician, and sometimes it just takes time. And forgiveness for our internal wounds. Forgiveness for our internal wounds is the first step of healing there. It's the first application of a healing ointment that begins the process of healing. And no, I didn't feel instantly better. But it was kind of like going to the gym for the very first time in your entire life. You got to start. Like if you've got a goal and you want to do something, you got to start exercising that muscle. And for me, with what I've learned along the way since, um, forgiveness for me is an act of obedience to my heavenly Father because of what the scripture says. And the scripture says to be forgiven, you must forgive. Even Jesus in the Lord's Prayer, what many are familiar with, forgive me of my debts as I forgive my debtors. Forgive me of my transgressions as I forgive those who transgressed against me. And then throughout Scripture, we know that forgiveness is a requirement for us to receive forgiveness, but it's not in terms of letting someone off the hook. In a faith or spiritual term, it is essentially saying, I'm not going to see to their punishment or repayment for what they've done. I'm going to put them in your hands and let you deal with it.
As you're kind of explaining this, even after all that you've gone through, you're trusting God enough still to give forgiveness to him and put them in his hands. There isn't like a break in that relationship where you almost don't trust God because of what he's allowed you to go through these past
Not yet.
years.
That would come, but
okay.
that
Gotcha.
would come. Because our first son was born in 2004, and then our daughter was born in 2006, and our youngest was born in 2009. And so we, in 2009, I was a service manager for a pest control company. I was in my mid to late 20s, late 27-ish, somewhere in there, 27 at the time. And I was fired from my position. And it was the day we were celebrating our oldest son's 5th birthday. And so my wife was pregnant with our third child. She was having complications and couldn't work. But I come home instead of, hey, had a busy day, great day, productive day. There were balloons and birthday presents and people there to celebrate my beautiful 5-year-old son. And I got to say, I don't have a job. I'm fired. And then I started cutting grass and washing cars and scooping horse manure and whatever else I could do, picking up sticks, whatever I could do to make money. And one day, this pastor that was a part of a new church plant, he was actually my youth pastor when I started going to that different church when I was 16. He was part of a church plant. And so he pulled me to the side, him and a businessman. And he was like, hey, dude, what are you like? You got 3 kids, you got 2 kids and a third on the way, and your wife can't work right now. Like, you don't have a job. Who do you want to be, man? Like, what do you want to be? Who do you want to be? I said, I've always felt to be, like I was called to be a pastor. I've always felt like I was called to be a pastor. And he said, you're such a cop-out. And I said, okay. And it kind of pissed me off because I didn't know I was being a cop-out. He said, you're still not being you're not being real. Who do you want to be? I'm like, what does he want me to say? And I said, in high school, my only dream was to join the Marine Corps. That was my only dream. And then I developed a cyst on my left eardrum. And so they had to go in and cut me from here to here, lay my ear open, go in, cut the cyst out. And it left a pinhole size hole on my eardrum, which resulted in hearing loss. So the Marine Corps didn't want me. The Army didn't want me. The Air Force didn't want me. And I didn't want to be in the Navy or the Coast Guard because I didn't want to live on a boat or on a ship. But nobody wanted me. Permanently disqualified is what they said. And I said, but every time I was around my dad, I noticed that he was around law enforcement, whether it's state troopers, sheriff's deputies, police officers, whatever. And they always, their families were so squared away. I could just feel something different about these men. And I said, I've always admired them and looked up to them. And I've always wanted to be like that. I've just never kind of had the courage to do it, and just never really had that. And he said, well, you need to grow some balls and go be a cop then.
The pastor
and so
said
fall, this. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a former Marine too. So
Gotcha.
he took off his pastor hat for a minute.
Yeah, he didn't mince words.
Yeah. And I like that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so in the fall of 2009, I swore in and started my career in law enforcement. And man, I'm going to tell you something. It was like I finally found what I was made to do. I finally found what I was created to do. Like God made me to be a law enforcement officer because I loved everything about it. I loved it all. I mean, and I felt I'm going to do this until I'm an old man. Like I'm going to do this until they say you can't walk anymore. Therefore, you can't be a police officer anymore. You got to leave. You can't come back. And I started off on night shift patrol, went to day shift patrol, traffic homicide, criminal investigations. Was trained as a FBI trained hostage negotiator, criminal intelligence analyst, criminal intelligence liaison. Managed 130 or whatever sex offenders. I loved police work, but there was a call, and I don't have war stories. There's nothing cool that I have to share. I was a grunt, and I didn't do anything spectacular. But there was this one call that I was like I was not a special agent. I was not in charge. I wasn't supervisor. I was nothing. But I was essentially a secondary negotiator responsible for taking notes and passing them along to my supervisor. And it was a situation that involved a little boy who was taken off of a school bus. Guy goes onto a school bus and shoots and kills the bus driver in front of a busload full of kids and takes the first boy off the bus he can grab and takes him into an underground bunker. This little boy was 5 years old. And that lasted about a week. Well, it lasted, about a week long hostage deal, got national media attention. Again, I was nothing in charge whatsoever. And I think it was Wall Street Journal or New York Times or somebody did a big piece on this several years ago, and they've had documentaries on it. But when the first day or whenever it was, the SWAT team dropped the drop phone into the bunker, the phone was equipped with camera and audio. And it allowed me to be able to sit and listen to him and watch him. And I was to watch and take notes, make observations, and pass it along for them to analyze and decide next steps or whatever. And I would watch this little boy sit down on the ground and play or color or whatever the crap he was doing. And somewhere, I didn't consciously recognize it at the time. It took some years after to kind of see this connection, and I don't understand it really, but I saw this little 5-year-old boy, and there was a piece of me that felt like I may be hostage to the people that hurt me in the past, and to how it was still affecting me, whether it was sexual addiction, porn addiction, alcohol addiction, whatever. Anger, rage, shame, guilt, fear, just a complete, utter, total mess,
So you had those at this time still, the porn, like porn, alcohol, you were going through all that kind of in the background.
Porn, not so much. And it really, I wouldn't have even called it an addiction. It was just whenever, spontaneous, no rhyme or reason, but, definitely all the other. But I'd been drinking, but not like I did after that week-long deal. I started spiraling. And I was drinking I didn't realize it then, but looking back, I was drinking for a purpose. I was drinking to do some harm. And all my other decisions, I wrote about it in my book. I was unfaithful to my wife. I'm not proud of it. But again, In fact, there's a lot of shame that goes with my actions. Like there's a lot of things that have happened to me, but I've done things to hurt other people too. And I don't blame any of my actions on what happened to me as a kid, as a teenager. I accept full responsibility for my behavior, for spending habits, for addictions, for being alcoholic, whatever it is. I accept full responsibility for every bit of it. But at the same time, I want to be able to look at it and say, what is the correlation between how my brain is wired and processes all these memories and feelings and emotions and thoughts, whatever, and desires, how does it correlate to where I am today? And so I didn't understand all that then. I still don't really understand it, but I didn't have any clue then. So I just drink and I drink and I'd come home and I'd drink and I'd drink and I'd drink some more and I'd party and I'd drink. And one day
Can you tell us? Can you tell us why you're doing all this and going through this in this call? What did faith kind of look like for you in that stretch of time? Church, faith, religion. Did you have any relationship with God at that point, or what did that look like?
If I went, it was to check off a box. If I went to church, it was to check off a box, But internally, at the time, I was like interrogating God, not based on his existence, but based on his claims of love and goodness. Because if Scripture says God is love, and if you're love and you're inherently good and you have a plan and a purpose for my life, then where the hell were you when this was happening to me and to all these other innocent people? Where were you? But particularly, selfishly, where were you when this was happening to me? And so I was internally, I was going through all these analytical, overthinking questions because I'm just analytical the way my brain is wired, and so that's kind of where I was. I was at a standoff. I was in a wrestling match. I don't know what you'd want to call it. I was fighting with God at every turn, and it was almost like he was gently standing there saying, "Give this to me. Let me take this from you." And I'm thinking, I'm questioning his worthiness to carry my burden. And as I know it sounds terrible, it's arrogant, but that's raw, that's real. I think that the reality is that we all have our doubts, we have our questions, we have our whys. And I know Job asked God why, and God was like, "Where were you when I created the earth? Where were you? I created the sky, the heavens, and everything else. And who are you to think you can ask me?" But and I'm very cautious, but at the time I was reckless. I was absolutely reckless in every facet of my life. I was messy. I was reckless. I was not in a good place, to say the least. And sometime later, after that ended, I came home one day and I took off my gear and I sat down in a recliner and I stared at my blank TV. And my wife was at the kitchen island behind me, and she turned the water off and she said, "Hey, babe, how was your day?" And she has never been anything but good to me. When we got married at 18, we got married because we couldn't get enough of each other. Like we would fall asleep talking on the phone at night. How stupid is that? Like, we get married because we want to spend the rest of our life with someone, because we love them so deeply. In order to understand the pain and the heaviness and the hurt and the complexity of this particular situation, where I'm sitting in the recliner staring at a blank TV and she's standing behind me, is that has always been. And I know there's guys that say, your wife's not supposed to be your best friend. You need to have some bros like that you can call on and talk to. Whatever, man. She's my best friend. She knows every freaking thing about me. She's been with me through bankruptcy in my 20s, through being on food stamps and government assistance, unemployment, lost jobs, instability. She's been with me through it all. Okay. She's my best friend. And I was not being a good friend. I was not being a good husband or a good lover. And I responded with one word that everybody listening to this has probably said at some point in your marriage. When your spouse said, "How was your day?" you responded with what? Fine. And it wasn't the word, it was how I said it or my body language or whatever. And it started an argument. She said, "When did you become such an asshole?" She didn't deserve that. She didn't deserve how I was treating her. She didn't deserve anything that I had done. She didn't deserve to get a man that was deeply wounded. And my regrets are that I didn't give her a man that was whole. Better yet, that I didn't fight to get whole, to get well sooner. And I feel like I have stolen so much joy and passion and life from her over 24 years because I have been a selfish dick in how I've handled my own pain. Because selfishness isn't just, I'm going to go buy a new truck, or I'm going to go buy a new boat, or I'm going to buy this, a gun, or this, or what. I'm going to do this because I'm going to go hang out with the boys, or I'm going to go golf. Selfishness at its core is not just what you do for yourself. It's what you withhold from your best friend. It's what you withhold from your spouse. And it's not always the good stuff that you withhold from, because in our vows we say, for better, for worse, for sickness or health, for richer, for poor, until death do us part. And that means we agree in covenant to share the burdens that we carry with each other. And I was being selfish and not saying, hey, I'm dealing with this. I need to find somebody that can help me. I wasn't communicating those things. And so that day, a cynical, cold-hearted prick packed my bags, and I went and stayed in a portable office building on my dad's property at his shop, near his shop. And I don't know how long I was there, but I remember the following Sunday, I got up. I guess it was the following Sunday shortly thereafter. That kind of time is like blocked and blurred there. But that Sunday shortly thereafter, I got up and I put on my uniform and I got in my patrol car and I went to work a 4-hour block of traffic enforcement. And after I finished that 4-hour block, I pulled my car into the parking lot of an abandoned gas station. I backed it into a parking space in front of the building, and I pulled out my sidearm and I stopped right here. I yelled at God and I said, I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know where you're at, but if you have a plan or a purpose for my life, you can have it. Otherwise, I'm out. I'm tired of hurting. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of struggling. I'm done. And I know that there's a significant difference in theology and in study of scripture and doctrine, in the difference of covenant and contract. I understand the difference. But in that moment, I believe something happened in an instant when I made an offer to essentially negotiate with God. If you have a plan or a purpose for my life, then you can have it. Otherwise, I'm done. I had a peace that overwhelmed me in the best of ways. It's something that I could try, and I've tried. I've written over 6.5 million words in 9 years or whatever. And I have tried to convey this peace in words, but it's something you have to experience for yourself. I had a love that embraced me in a patrol car. And I think about, where would my wife and my kids be today had I not been a little reckless in my faith that morning? Had I not been desperate? Nobody knew that from the time I was a little boy, I had wrestled with thoughts of killing myself. I'd be better off dead. Other people would be better off if I'd have never been born. And I think about who their daddy would be, who her husband would be, who would walk them into school for the first day, who would be there for graduation, for prom, and one day their weddings, who would change out the light bulbs, or somebody would. And that's essentially how I felt. I felt deep down like, yeah, they're going to be sad for a little bit. And they may, they may smoke Boston Butts as a fundraiser or something and maybe make some t-shirts. But in about 6 months, all my stuff will be packed up in boxes and everybody will move on. Because I have been the biggest piece of shit and I deserve to be forgotten. And my entire relationship with God until that moment was based on fear that my bad behavior or good behavior could never be enough, could never be good enough, because I can't live up to these standards of religion that men have created. When at the end of the day, the standard of good has never been man-made standards. The standard of good has always been holiness. And I can't be righteous. I can't be holy. Like I can try, but I can't live up to this unattainable standard. It doesn't mean I shouldn't try, but I don't have that ability. So I have to understand what God's word says in Matthew, I believe it's 6:33, when he's talking about how are the birds fed and the animals fed and how do the flowers blossom and the grass grows, and it's all taken care of. They don't have to worry about anything. And he said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness and all these things. And in that context, he was talking about material provision, and all these things will be added to you. So the thing before that was seek first his kingdom, understanding his ways, his standards, and his righteousness, meaning I can't be righteous, but I can wear his righteousness. And his righteousness is all that I need. That's the only credentials that I ever have to have. And so anyway, that day after the patrol car, I went home. I went and found my wife, and I told her what happened. It was an emotional mess. And
so you were in the car. This happened. I mean, did you just put your gun back and then head straight home, or how does that end?
I went and found. I don't think it was home. I went and found her. I can't remember where she was. But yeah, after all that, like I had to sit there for a while. I mean, I was a mess, dude. Like I was bawling my eyes out, and I thank God that somebody didn't stop and ask me for directions, because I was visible in a marked unit.
Yeah.
And nobody pulled up to say, hey, can you tell me how to get here or whatever? Nope, not a soul pulled up. Because I was a mess. I was not crying. It was ugly. And
but so you had peace that you can't even explain at that point.
After that, after I kind of yelled at God, I had a complete peace, and I started thinking, man, if everybody that I know, and even people I don't know, but if everybody I know could experience this, what a freaking game changer, man. What a game changer. And, experiencing God isn't about, and I'm not against going to church. Find a Bible-believing church. Find a good church. Be a part of it. Go attend. Be a part of it. it's good to gather with believers. It is good. Don't neglect that. You need to be around believers. You need to be around like-minded people. Faith. People are going to challenge you and strengthen you, inspire you. But encountering God is not so much about what you can do, good works. It's not so much about where you go to church. It's not so much about what you do. It's how quick you're willing to surrender all of yourself to who He is with no understanding of what the next step may be. In the rawness of that moment, it's like everything in the whole world pauses briefly and time stands still when your soul is fully surrendered to Him. And He says, I've got you. I've got you. And His answer when I said, where have you been? Where were you through all this? His answer was clear. I'm the reason you survived it. I'm the reason you're still here. I'm the reason you had that little seed of hope. That anger, rage, whatever it was that caused me to yell at God and call on Him. Even in our sin, calling on Him brings us to a place of reconciling with Him, because it's His love calls us to change. It's His love that causes us to come to Him and say, I want to live my life in a way that is a proper response to the love you've shown me. It's not about, well, hey, bro, I can't do that anymore because I'm a Christian now. So I can't do that anymore. You know, I've got to have this rigid set of standards. You're going to fall. You're going to fall every time. You're going to fall 10 times out of 10 because you can't live up to those standards forever. And even if you can adhere to those standards for a period of time, you're going to miss out. You're not going to have any joy. You're not going to have any peace. You're going to look like a miserable, you're going to be so miserable because you're trying your best to be good enough for Him to love you. Trying to be so good just so you can get to heaven. And you miss out on the whole purpose of existence. And the whole purpose of existence is to take what He's done for you and to tell somebody about it in the way you love them and treat them. Because His love changes everything. And that's at the core, man. At the core of it. It's not about a sermon where you make a decision because you're afraid to go to hell. I don't want my wife to come to me because she's afraid of having a relationship with somebody else. I want her to be with me because she genuinely loves me and wants to be with me. And she does. But I don't want servitude. And marriage is a reflection, the marriage union is a reflection of the relationship between the church and Big C Church and God. He doesn't want servitude. He doesn't want slaves. He wants people that are pursuing Him. Hey, let's go have a cup of coffee, man. How you doing? Talk to me. Let me tell you what's been going on in my life. Building relationship. But we have this whole screwed up perception of it because of religion and how if you say one thing on Facebook or social media, what you believe, 10 million people are going to disagree. And you're going to have this big theological debate when it's never about that junk. It's how can you build a relationship with someone? How can you build a circle of relationship where you can love people, where when they're in their darkest moments, they can come to you and talk to you. And so, yeah, that day, rambling. Sorry, I started going down a rabbit trail, but
no, it's all wise words, man. I love it.
I put my weapon in my holster, and I went and found my wife. And while I firmly believed that I had an encounter with a living God, I still needed to make some behavior changes. God restored my marriage. I stopped drinking, and I started writing. I would go home and I would dump all the stuff that I was dealing with in my head, and I would just write it. I just dump it out. And man, it felt so good. Man, it felt so amazing. And I was like, this is cheaper than therapy. Like, and nobody has to ever read this. And so that kind of progressed. And then I felt compelled to write a book. I felt like God, wanted me to write a book. And so I wrote and self-published a little book. And that started a whole nother season and a transition where people started asking me to come and speak in small churches and different
Are you
things
still in law
started taking
enforcement at
off.
this time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in the fall, in September of 15, I got up on a Sunday morning to go to work. And this little, like, wasn't audible, wasn't loud, this voice said, today's the day. Now, to 10 people, it might mean 10 different things. But to me, I knew exactly what those words meant. And I went and turned in my paperwork and submitted my resignation from the one profession, the one call I had answered that I loved. And I have analyzed it. I've looked at it. Maybe I was running from, I didn't want to go back to who I'd become. Maybe I was running because I wanted to save my life and save my marriage and save my family. But at the end of the day, I had built, when I wrote my book and self-published it, I needed a website. And so I built my own website because I was making $15 and change an hour as a cop, and taking care of a family of 5 on one police officer's salary is very difficult. So I couldn't afford to pay somebody for a website. So I learned how to do it. And so people started asking me to do their websites, but just because they saw mine. And so I had, $30,000 in pending business, and I had people asking me to come speak, and I had people wanting to buy my book, in which I'm not going to tell you the name of it. My very first one is not for sale. And all these different things were going on. And I'm like, I can't keep up with all of this and working full time. And I'd have been applying for state law enforcement jobs, federal law enforcement jobs. And man, it was like doors were slamming at every turn. Every opportunity was like door slam, door slam, door slam. And it was clear God was calling me to a different season and a different assignment, a different assignment. And so that morning I turned all my stuff in and, I turned my paperwork in and then left law enforcement. They took, burned my vacation time that I had because you can't use it. I mean, you can't get it once you leave. And so I burned the rest of that, rolled out. I don't like the way I handled all that. But I'll tell you this. I've gone on to write a total of like nine books. I'm working on book number 10 and 11 now. I've sold about 200,000 copies. I've impacted about 1 million lives through speaking, books, media interviews, all that stuff. I have questioned in different seasons when you're in the famine cycle of feast or famine of, man, did I make the right decision? I left secure retirement, secure pay, albeit low, secure pay, government retirement, benefits, to say yes to a call that I believe God put on my life that was in a different direction. And then I'll look at the emails or the messages I've gotten from somebody that says, hey, because of your book, Bulletproof Marriage, we're still married. We didn't get a divorce, and now we're ministering to other couples. Or the dozens of, hey, I read your book today and I decided, I don't know what it means to follow Jesus, but I want to know. Or, hey, I had planned my suicide and you gave me hope. And I could go for days through testimonials, through messages, through conversations that I've had over 9 years that are people that are still here. And you know what? Is it foolish to leave security and stability to go on this adventure for one person? I think that's what Jesus would do for me. because he left his throne to come walk in the form of a man to lay his life down for me. And if we're going to have a role model, then why not? Like, I'm not even remotely close. I'm like horribly far off, but that's the role model to follow. You know, it doesn't make earthly sense. It is hard to survive financially like this at times. It has been. But I'll tell you, there will come a day when he will call me home and I will breathe my last breath and I will leave this life. And if nobody remembers my name, someone out of the people that I've had an impact on will have touched other lives, and they will have touched other lives. And that love went from one message to many. And that means families are still together. That means there's a little boy that still has his dad. There's a little boy that still has his mom, or there's a little girl that still has her dad or her mom. A brother still has a brother. A husband still has a wife. A wife still has a husband. And we can be cynical, cold-hearted, hateful pricks. Or we can say, you know what? Maybe I just never gave love like this a real shot. Maybe I never gave healing a real chance. Because we've got such skewed perspectives of all this stuff because of our past experiences. And then how that's programmed our minds to see it and perceive it and process it when we're approached with it. You have no idea the beauty that awaits you on the other side of healing. Like, not that it's this line that you just cross. It's a journey. I mean, it's an adventure all by itself. Have mercy. And it can be messy. But I'm here today because of love. I'm here today because of love. The love that has been demonstrated to me, the love my wife has shown me. She's taught me through her actions, not her words, but her actions, how to love someone who is not easy to love. She's taught me what it looks like to demonstrate tremendous grace, tremendous forgiveness, tremendous love. That's it. Just love. And love is not something that we say. Yeah, you can write it on a card and you can put it in a text message, but it's best shown by how we act and the actions we take. And so whether it's to your spouse, but that's where we often mess up. Like, we often mess up because we try to love others. And the scripture says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your being, and love your neighbor as yourself, as you love yourself. And most of us haven't experienced love, and we don't know how to love ourselves. Therefore, we can't love others properly and fully. And that's the greatest deception of humanity that the enemy has put in us and blinded us with, is to think that we could love with some superficial love. And a love that lasts a lifetime is one that continues to show up. It continues to get up. It continues to forgive. It swallows its pride. It's not demanding. It's not boastful. And it's not like it's condoning horrible behavior. Don't get me wrong. If you're in an abusive situation, remove yourself from that junk, whether it's workplace or marriage, relationships, whatever. That's not a reason to be there. But real love is not going to put you in that, like, they're not going to treat you like that. Know that.
Right.
And so anyway,
I'm curious. You speak about love and your wife and the comeback, and take me back to that day. Obviously, you come from your patrol car. All that has happened. Put your gun away. Go find your wife.
Yeah.
What does it look like to tell her what happened? How does that go?
It was rather emotional. it was very emotional, and but it wasn't complicated. She embraced me and she said, "Come home." And I think that's a message to a lot of us today, because we've gotten lost in the woods of trauma. We've gotten lost in the woods of addiction. We've gotten lost in the woods of life. And we need to come back home to who we are here. Come back home to who we were before all that junk. You know, when I was writing Unconquered, she came to me and she said, I need you to do me a favor. She said, I need you to talk to somebody. This was 2021, 2022. And I'm like, okay. So I reached out to a friend and he connected me. And so for the first time in my life, I talked to a trauma therapist about everything. I had never talked to a trauma therapist ever about the stuff like in that context. I mean, I've talked to dozens and dozens and dozens of therapists across the country, but not in that context. I've shared my story, but I've never had a therapist sit down and help me kind of work through some of this stuff, you know, and did something called EMDR. But that day was, the beauty of it was the simplicity of it. And it was simply, she embraced me and she said, come home. It was very emotional. But, you know, I did an interview with Good Morning America last year, and they were like, how has faith played a role in your life? You know, as a man, as a husband, as a father, as first responder, like, how has it helped you? And I looked at her and I just said, I'm here. Don't overthink it. Like he says, Jesus said, come to me with childlike faith. Don't try to intellectually figure him out. Have childlike faith and believe. And so from that day when I went and found Amber and we had that conversation, it was just another reminder. Even in the patrol car, it was another reminder. Come to me with childlike faith. You know, we screw it up when we try to figure him out. Good luck trying to figure God out. Best of luck to you. Yeah, just come to him with a childlike faith and open your hands, open your heart, and you know, reach out, find somebody that you can talk to. I didn't have a soul. Not one person knew what I was dealing with and where I was at mentally that day. Not a single person. In fact, had I pulled the trigger, people may have said, yeah, we saw the signs, but we didn't see this. Like, we didn't see this coming. Like, yeah, he was drinking kind of heavy and he was separated from his wife. And I know based on research that somewhere like 40 to 70% of suicides are tied to failed relationships. But most people would have been like, no, we never saw this coming. He never mentioned anything about it. And most people don't. You know, I'm not just going to call you up and be like, hey, Chad, what's up, brother? I'm thinking about killing myself today. I just thought I'd let you know and talk to you.
Right.
But we are going to throw up some flags subconsciously. Like, we're not going to do it like we're aware of what we're doing, but we'll throw up some flags. And so anyway, yeah, so that's a little bit about how faith and spirituality has played a role in my life. So I know that was a little bit longer of an explanation to your question.
No, that was awesome, man. I'm curious, thinking back on the story, thinking of how you started it, and just kind of processing all that and where you're at now. You mentioned, I mean, a number of times in the beginning, you felt like you had been called to be a pastor, a minister, a preacher. I don't remember how you put it, one of those words. You felt like through the early years of your life, you were called to do that. And it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like that has kind of come full circle. And that calling, based on what you had to go through and where you're at now, is kind of what you have, I don't want to say fallen into, but what God has led you into. Maybe it wasn't the timing, obviously, that you assumed, but now that's kind of where you're at.
Yeah. You know, I wouldn't dare call myself a pastor. But the term minister means to serve, you know, And so if that means that because I try to find ways to serve that I minister, I think we're all supposed to be ministers. But I don't hold a title. I was an ordained minister until 2018, 19, somewhere in there. And I turned in those credentials because I felt like, if you got those, what does it do? It means I can marry people. I can, do funeral ceremonies. I can do marriage ceremonies. Otherwise, it just qualifies me to go work inside of a church. And most of the people that I talk to and I work with, they're not in churches, man. Not yet. And so I turned all that stuff in. And it maybe, if God made it clear that he wanted me to be a pastor one day, then maybe that's what, I do. But I'm not opposed to doing anything that he wants me to do.
Do you think so?
But I don't know that I wouldn't call myself a pastor.
Not a pastor, a minister. Gotcha. You just mentioned it, and that's kind of why this podcast exists, to be honest, is a lot of, or most of, the first responders I talk to and friends with have dealt with are not in church. They don't have that spiritual influence. They don't feel comfortable talking about faith.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a reason behind that? Anything that comes to mind that you'd throw out there?
Yeah. I'll try to answer the question briefly. Well, I think a lot of times it's fear of ridicule, fear of being ostracized, fear of somebody saying separation of church and state, which is a conversation for another day. We ain't got time to get into that right now. But I think that it boils down to, well, I can't speak for others, but for me, it was like, if I mention something about faith, then they're going to expect me to be perfect, or they're going to ostracize me. I cared way too much about what people thought. I've been that way for a lot of my life. I've cared way too much about what people thought about me. And so I would venture to say the reason why you could go and serve with someone on duty for an entire career and not know what they believe is because we're taught that we don't talk about those things. And that is a massive, massive lie. If you're going to have my back in a life or death situation, I would like to know what you believe. I ain't got to agree with you. I don't have to agree with you. And I'm not here to try to convert everybody. I'm not here to try to convert you or change. Like, I know whatever you're doing. But if you see something in me and you got questions, I'm happy to help you. But for me, like, I want to know what you believe, man. Like, what do you believe? Because if the only thing you believe in is yourself and you don't believe in nothing bigger than you, like, I don't know. I mean, can I trust you? That's just that's my personal opinion, right or wrong. It's just my personal opinion. And just answer the question. But I think a lot of times we don't talk about it. We don't, bring it up in those relationships because we're afraid of being ostracized or ridiculed or we're going to be held to a higher standard, even higher than the standard that you already have to live up to and as a law enforcement officer. So, or any other first responder for that matter, you're expected to live above reproach. And, so I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Adam, I want to be respectful of your time, obviously, and I appreciate you being open to talk about that kind of stuff and being authentic and honest in all that you've gone through and what you're dealing with now and where you're at. If there's a place, obviously you do speaking, you do books. Is there a place if someone hears this and feels compelled that they can reach out to you or reach out to see what you're getting into?
Yeah. Social media, The Official Adam Davis is on Facebook, and then Instagram is Official Adam Davis. And then my website is theadamdavis.com. And I don't know when y'all are going to hear this, but as of the time was recording this, there are about 40 copies of this in my office signed. If you want a copy, this is the full story. It would take us about 6 hours to go through the full story, but that's the full story. And there's a few of these left in the warehouse if you're a law enforcement officer. So check it out. And but I'd love to hear from you. Just shoot me a message, shoot me an email, adam@theadamdavis.com. Let me know you heard me here on this podcast. I'd love to connect with you and talk to you.
All right, Adam, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and we wish you the best in everything moving forward, obviously.
Thank you, Chad. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, that was Adam Davis. Thanks again to him for taking the time to be authentic and hang out with us for a little bit. Hopefully it was helpful to you. And if it was, would you consider leaving a review, subscribing, and even shouting it out on social media? Again, you could literally be saving lives and families by inviting others to listen and inviting others to hope, healing, and peace simply by doing those things and making this more available for them. It'll take you just a minute, I promise. Hey, if you've experienced an invite to peace similar to what Adam talked about, or have a topic or conversation that you'd like to share and think might be helpful to people, hit me up. Let me know. chad.campese@gmail.com. chad.campese@gmail.com. I'd love to talk with you, maybe even bring you on. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and Facebook. I don't post much of anything, but I do check my messages. Hey, next time we have Ryan Bosler on. He did 2 tours in Iraq as a brand new father and as a brand new husband. We talk about the impact of seeing constant death and wondering if you're going to make it back and what that does to your faith and your life, especially, again, being a new husband and a new father in the midst of it all. All right, guys, come on back next time. Here's a clip from that episode. And please don't forget, taking a spiritual approach to well-being will help you achieve life-altering results. All right, guys, I will catch you on the other side.
Lost in my own anger and grief and all that I immediately just started, drinking a lot, and then started taking all kinds of medications that they would say, hey, maybe you're depressed, so take some of that, and here's some things for anxiety, and you can't sleep, so here's some stuff to help you sleep, and you've got some aches and pains or whatever, and you could throw in maybe some oxy, and it was just nonstop of any type of cocktail that I could come up with that just unfortunately set me down a really bad trajectory to finish out my time in the Army, and then just stay addicted to all of that stuff as I tried to begin my new life